TRC companies, which is a member of WSP. My team is responsible for hosting ACT Expo. My team identifies and secures grant funding. So our incentives team is focused on finding the opportunity dollars, understanding what the parameters of those dollars are, what constraints, eligibility requirements, and then ultimately going out and finding a path to secure those funds. We've been very successful in that regard, over $3 billion secured in the past 25 years. We're in a very different era of incentives though as of late. The past year and a half has been a new set of challenges that we just really haven't seen in the market. I've been in this space for almost 20 years now, and it's a new thing every day. Our goal really is to help our clients understand that shifting landscape, figure out how these incentives interact with the existing regulations or upcoming regulations, and then better understand how the financial models can work to ultimately successfully deploy their technologies. In all of the school districts we've ever worked with, we have very rarely met somebody whose job was grant manager. And so the administrative burden put on these school districts is often the biggest limiting factor, because these grants and incentive programs and infrastructure deployment and low carbon fuel standard, these are not charitable donations. These are contractual obligations with a government agency. And that carries a tremendous amount of administrative burden. You know, at the basic, it's like a quarterly report, an annual report. But as you get more in depth, it's daily fuel operating or daily fuel requirements, data collection on miles traveled, emissions reduced, lessons learned, and labor implications. And so there's a tremendous amount of overhead that goes into these grants that, while it looks pretty and shiny up front, it's like, hey, here's a couple $100,000 per unit, the actual implications and the project on the staff is often a little too much to bear for a lot of these school districts. So that's been the biggest educational opportunity for us in working with our school district partners, is advising them first on what this really means in terms of taking on these financial burdens. So one of the biggest implications that we've seen influencing the market is battery chemistry. As battery chemistry continues to evolve and move across various molecules, the safety parameters change, the implementation and costs change. So we've been monitoring that with a lot of interest. It's a little bit less intense of an impact on the school bus environment, because you don't have GVWR issues on a school bus, or as you do with a truck. So the heavier you get on a truck, the less you can freight you move, which reduces the amount of value that you can carry on that truck. Obviously, it's a different set of financial parameters for a school bus, but it's still a parameter that's important to watch. Supply chain continues to be a sticking point. The time to market for a lot of the products is still slower than a lot of operators would like. And then the last element is power availability. We have heard quotes from utilities over the past couple of years that have ranged from, we can get enough power on site in 6 months, to it'll take us 36 to 48 months to get enough power on site. And so if you have electrification plans that are 1 to 2 year plans, but your utility provider says, well, it'll take 4 years to have sufficient electrons to charge that vehicle, that's a pretty big sticking point. Those are the three big factors right now that are influencing how we're seeing the school bus market play out. The software-defined vehicle concept, the sort of a computer with wheels, is really taking shape in terms of moving this market in a certain direction. Gone are the days of it being a rolling stock asset defined purely as a physical asset. It's now very much a digital asset with a physical manifestation. So that has influenced how fleets track the value of their commodity, basically, because you now need to factor in over-the-air updates, and you now need to think about when that thing shows up and plugs in. In the school bus market in particular, it's not just a consumer of energy anymore, it's now a manager of energy. And so if that bus can pull energy out of the market at a lower cost and then repark and export that power at a higher cost, well, you've got an asset producer now, and that's a very different revenue model than fleets traditionally adopt. The other element is AI. The proliferation of AI is just ubiquitous at this point. Working with, avoiding the AI slop of like data and getting into those sort of hallucinations, that's all scary stuff. But We are seeing fleets do a lot of really great work with AI in terms of fleet planning and asset planning, like where to put buses when to charge, what's the expectation on costs. So that's been a big opportunity we've seen so far that fleets have taken advantage of. I think shared use is something that we're seeing a lot more, rather than fleets looking at their equipment as in and of itself their own equipment. Like, this is my one asset, I own it. Looking at pooled resources, the cost of this technology is still prohibitive for the widespread market, and so broad adoption is very challenging at these price points. But if you're looking at pooled assets or charging as a service or vehicle as a service, it makes it more economically viable for smaller fleets in particular to participate in this market. And so I'm watching that one pretty closely. I want to say eager, but it's limiting. It's this conservative eagerness, I think is kind of how I'm seeing it. There is an absolute willingness to move in the right direction, but the school districts are still defining what that right direction means for them. And so we're seeing across from like propane solutions or clean diesel solutions to zero emission solutions, those can all be the right direction depending on the fleet. And there is an eagerness to move in those directions, but the infrastructure implications, how much power they can get, the cost, all those things are serving still as limiting factors for how eager they can move forward.